Donald Trump hates public education. Donald Trump hates public broadcasting and public media. Things like NPR and PBS. He hates Sesame Street, I guess is the right way to put it. Back in 1988, that found its way into a new lawsuit filed by National Public Radio and of 3 different public radio stations in Colorado against the Trump administration in an unfair firefight, which he tried to cut their federal funding. In particular, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting created by Congress. Well, actually, a private entity that's funded by Congress.
Did Trump just cross the line? His executive order to pull federal funding from NPR and PBS is now at the center of a fierce legal showdown. And what NPR claims in their lawsuit, well, it could be a bombshell. Could this be the most public First Amendment fight of the decade? Keep watching, you won't believe what's at stake. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Donald Trump's favorite word at the moment seems to be woke. Anything he doesn't like, woke. Someone disagrees with him, definitely woke. And now, NPR and PBS are apparently the newest villains in his ongoing battle against the so-called woke agenda. On May 1st, Trump signed an executive order aiming to cut all federal funding to these public broadcasters. According to Trump, this isn't just about saving taxpayer dollars. It's about stopping what he calls biased media from misinforming the American people. But here's the thing.
NPR, National Public Radio, who's suing here with a new lawsuit in the District of Columbia that I have my hot little hands on, I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. They get about $11 million a year. Donald Trump is not allowed to stop, commandeer, embargo funds that were headed for an entity funded by Congress, but he does that time and time again. They use it to maintain the radio stations, the transmitters, that infrastructure that keeps them on the air. Now, the wolf coming as a wolf, that's obvious to anybody.
What Trump describes as biased, many others simply call journalism. Oh, and there's one little problem. That funding he's targeting, it doesn't come from him. Cue the legal chaos. Now, NPR and PBS sit at the heart of America's public broadcasting system. They depend on federal funding supplied through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB, created by Congress back in the 60s to keep public media independent from political influence. You know, the exact opposite of what Trump's trying to do now. His executive order would drastically slash that funding, putting shows like PBS's Frontline and NPR's investigative reporting in serious jeopardy. But cutting off funding that Congress authorized raises a giant legal red flag. Trump may think he holds all the cards as president, but the law says otherwise.
Donald Trump, he issued back on May 1, and we covered it here on the Midas Touch Network and on Legal AF, ending taxpayer subsidization of biased media. One of his many executive orders. There's a reason, a very good reason, back in 1967, that Congress decided we needed public outlets and public broadcasting and public TV. He goes on in his executive order to say, Americans have the right to expect that if their taxpayer dollars fund public broadcasting at all, they fund only fair, accurate, unbiased, and nonpartisan news coverage.
Congress controls the purse strings, not Trump. He can't just decide overnight to defund a public institution because Sesame Street bruised his ego. In fact, this isn't Trump's first run-in with the CPB. Just a few days before his executive order, on April 29th, he tried to shake up the CPB board itself. In a brazen move, he attempted to fire board members who dared to disagree with him publicly. These weren't random appointees. They were seasoned professionals whose job wasn't to rubber stamp Trump's decisions, but to oversee public broadcasting for the good of the country. This power play blew up in Trump's face, though. The CPB immediately filed a lawsuit against him, claiming that his attempt to purge the board members violated their independence. Was this Trump's dress rehearsal for what he had planned? It's hard to ignore the timeline.
It's a complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief. Basically has 4 counts. 3 of them are based on First Amendment violations. But they have the right to First Amendment expression, and they're getting viewpoint retaliated against by the Trump administration. I mean, I like them, but I can barely stay awake when I listen to their programming. And then the 4th count in their complaint, which runs about 45 pages, is for due process violations under the 5th Amendment. In the executive order, he said, it's not, we're going to unbias the free expression and the marketplace of ideas.
Here's what makes all of this even wilder. NPR and PBS are no strangers to accusations of political bias. Over the years, critics from both sides of the aisle have pointed fingers, claiming their coverage leans too far left or doesn't give certain topics enough weight. But despite these critiques, NPR remains one of the most trusted news sources in the country, reaching an audience of a staggering 43 million listeners every week. Think about that. Almost 1 in 8 Americans tunes into NPR for news, music, or cultural programs. Public media isn't some fringe institution. It's an integral part of how millions stay informed, whether they live in big city suburbs or rural towns where options for serious journalism are slim to none. And yet, Trump seems convinced that public broadcasters are a threat to his vision of America, or at least to his personal image. You can almost picture him watching Sesame Street and wondering if Big Bird is plotting to get him canceled. The man uses the word woke so much, you'd think he's on a mission to trademark it. But let's set aside the jokes about Trump wrestling with Muppets, or trying to rename Reading Rainbow into Bankrupt Liberal Agenda. His moves against NPR and PBS raise a question much bigger than the overuse of political buzzwords. If a president can single out media organizations for punishment just because he doesn't like what they report, Trump's critics argue that what's at stake here is whether America stays true to its democratic ideals, like an open, independent press, or inches closer to a system where leaders reel in any outlet that dares to challenge them. For now, the lawsuit is set to unfold like a high-stakes poker game. On one side, Trump is betting big on his claims of bias and wasteful spending. On the other, NPR is pushing back with a legal argument that's hard to ignore, that public media exists not to please politicians, but to serve the public. Of course, as much as both sides love to debate constitutional law, there's also a bit of theater in all this. Trump isn't exactly hiding his disdain for NPR or PBS, a fact that the lawsuit is sure to spotlight. Oh, and don't be surprised if his public comments about fake news and failing NPR turn up as evidence in court. So yes, this lawsuit isn't just about whether Big Bird gets to keep his job. It's about whether the president can punish the press for doing theirs. And spoiler alert, the fight is far from over. In fact, it's just getting started. NPR is taking this fight directly to the First Amendment, and they're not holding back. In their lawsuit, they argue that Trump's executive order is more than just a political stunt. It's a straight-up attempt to punish them for the reporting he doesn't like. They claim the order targets their content and violates their First Amendment rights, and the case they've built pulls in some heavy constitutional artillery. The big question is whether Trump's order, framed as a budgetary decision, is really a thinly veiled act of retaliation. The foundation of NPR's argument leans on a landmark 1943 Supreme Court case, West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett. This case set the precedent that no official can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. In other words, no government figure can dictate which beliefs or opinions are acceptable, or weaponize their power to punish opinions they don't like. NPR claims Trump is essentially trying to do just that by cutting their funding because he disapproves of their journalism. If this precedent holds firm, it could deal a serious blow to Trump's order. But here's what makes this case particularly striking. NPR isn't just throwing around abstract legal jargon. They're pointing to years of Trump's public statements as proof that this isn't about fiscal policy. It's personal. Justice Antonin Scalia's famous quote from Morrison versus Olson also pops up in NPR's lawsuit, and for good reason. Scalia warned that this wolf comes as a wolf, meaning sometimes the government's motives for retaliating against someone are so obvious, so blatant, it's hard to miss. NPR claims Trump's attacks fit this description perfectly: bold, unmistakable, and openly targeting their content. From his constant insults about fake news to his rants about NPR being biased, they argue his motives couldn't be clearer. This isn't a president trying to handle the budget. This is a president openly at odds with a media outlet and going out of his way to punish them for it. And let's not forget Trump's running commentary on public broadcasters. He's repeatedly lumped NPR and PBS in with the fake news outlets, calling their coverage unfair and claiming they're nothing more than mouthpieces for the left. And if he hasn't straight up said it, he's strongly implied that their reporting crosses some invisible line of loyalty he thinks all media should have toward him. NPR's lawsuit uses these comments to build their case, arguing that his executive order is the capstone on a years-long campaign of personal and political retaliation. Essentially, it's like Trump has written their legal arguments for them in real time, and on Twitter, no less. Now, could this case set a new precedent if NPR wins? Absolutely. One of the angles NPR is pushing is that media outlets everywhere could benefit from a decision in their favor. If judges agree that Trump went too far, it could place a massive hurdle in the path of any future government official who tries to punish dissenting voices. And given how polarized American politics have become, that precedent could be more important than ever. But let's pause for a second and look at the flip side. If Trump's order is upheld, that's a green light for government leaders at any level to yank funding or benefits from public institutions they don't like, all under the guise of policy. It's not just public broadcasters who would be at risk here. It's libraries, schools, and pretty much any public service that isn't cheering loudly enough for the leadership of the day. Of course, this all circles back to Trump's peculiar relationship with the press. One can only imagine how the First Amendment looks through his eyes. Maybe he interprets it as freedom of speech unless it's mean to me. That would explain a lot. After all, who could forget his suggestions in 2017 that the government consider revoking NBC's broadcasting license because they published stories he didn't like? Now, NPR doesn't have a broadcasting license because they're public radio, but his targeting of them feels like deja vu. The man's track record with the free press isn't exactly glowing. And let's be honest, the optics aren't great for Trump. The president who once demanded loyalty pledges from his staff is now accused of punishing organizations for what? Not being his cheerleaders. NPR is trying to spin this into a fight for journalistic independence, and their lawyers are treating every Trump soundbite about fake news as potential courtroom gold. If this lawsuit takes off, don't be surprised when his long history of attacking journalists, from calling them enemies of the people to kicking out reporters from press events, gets paraded in front of the judge. NPR's fight is about more than keeping their funding intact. It's about the core principle of a free press in a democracy. If Trump can decide which media gets money and which doesn't, then who's left to report on what those in power are actually doing? That's the argument NPR is hammering home. It's not just about funding, it's about whether the government can silence critical voices whenever it wants. But here's the kicker. The stakes go beyond NPR, PBS, or even Trump. If the court sides with NPR, it could be a major win for media organizations across the board. A line in the sand saying the First Amendment still means something, but if Trump prevails, the consequences could ripple far and wide. Suddenly, any future leader with thin skin and enough ambition has a roadmap for eroding press freedom without much effort. This battle might be about NPR for now, but make no mistake, it's about all of us in the end. So what exactly is NPR hoping to gain from this fight? And what could Trump's win mean for the future of public media? Let's explore. If Trump gets his way, NPR, PBS, and the whole idea of free speech could take a serious hit, and it's not just about turning off Big Bird's lights. Right now, NPR and PBS are fighting for more than just their budgets. They're fighting to keep their editorial independence intact because once that's gone, can we even call it public broadcasting anymore? What's tricky here is that Congress, not the president, controls the purse string. And let's not forget, this is the same guy who once considered pulling NBC's broadcasting license just for hurt feelings. Maybe it's not such a stretch to picture Trump dreaming up PBS Kids 2.0, a channel starring him in every program, selling MAGA action figures between segments. All jokes aside, this fight is about more than public broadcasting. It's about free speech itself. If NPR loses, the wave of influence won't stop at them. The government could start cracking down on any organization that steps out of line, punishing dissent with funding cuts or shutdowns. The chilling effect this could have on journalism is hard to overstate. Who's going to report the tough stories if they're worried Uncle Sam might slash their budgets the next day? On the flip side, if NPR wins, it sends a strong message. Presidents can't run roughshod over public institutions or use federal funding as a weapon to silence critics. But make no mistake, this battle is part of a much bigger war. Free speech has been under fire on multiple fronts lately, and this lawsuit is just the latest chapter in a longer story. Will this be the decision that cements public media's independence, or just one battle in a never-ending fight? NPR hopes to do more than just overturn this executive order. They're aiming to secure the future of public media and reaffirm its role role in a democracy. So what do you think? Should public broadcasting remain something that operates without fear of political interference? Or has its time passed? For now, the only certainty is that the stakes have never been higher. This lawsuit isn't just another dramatic chapter in Trump's fight against the media. It's about the backbone of American democracy. The 1943 Supreme Court ruling in West Virginia Board of Education v. Barnett made clear that no official has the right to dictate what opinions are acceptable. Yet here we are, watching a president test those very waters. If NPR's funding can be threatened, what stops leaders from silencing their critics entirely? It's a question every democracy faces. Who holds the line when power tries to bend the rules? Keep an eye on this case. It could redefine press freedom in real time.